En las últimas semanas, una historia cautivadora ha tomado al mundo por asalto. Durante una audiencia en el Congreso mexicano en la que se debatían los ovnis, ahora conocidos como fenómenos anómalos no identificados o FANI, un personaje llamado Jaime Maussan desveló dos pequeños cadáveres de aspecto alienígena, afirmando que no eran de este mundo. La revelación, respaldada por supuestas pruebas científicas, ha suscitado fascinación y debate en todo el mundo. El acontecimiento en sí fue digno de mención, con expertos de diversos campos reunidos para debatir sobre los ovnis y el posible reconocimiento por parte de México de vida extraterrestre en sus leyes. Maussan, conocido por su trabajo sobre ovnis y extraterrestres, presentó los dos enigmáticos cuerpos, con cráneos alargados y manos de 3 dedos, descubiertos en Perú en 2017. Lo que hizo que esta historia fuera realmente asombrosa fueron las afirmaciones hechas sobre los cadáveres. Maussan afirmó que las exhaustivas pruebas de ADN demostraban que eran seres no humanos no relacionados con nuestra evolución. El doctor José de Jesús Zalce Benítez, experto forense, apoyó estas afirmaciones, presentando una letanía de pruebas, incluyendo análisis de ADN que supuestamente probaban que los cuerpos no tenían relación con los humanos. Estos seres presentaban características únicas, como cráneos grandes y visión estereoscópica. Las pruebas también revelaron implantes metálicos que contenían metales raros utilizados en tecnología aeroespacial, lo que planteaba dudas sobre su origen. Además, el 30% de su ADN era desconocido en la Tierra, lo que desafiaba las normas biológicas establecidas. La historia recibió una gran atención, apareciendo en medios de comunicación respetados y suscitando debates entre científicos y escépticos. A pesar de las críticas, Maussan invitó al mundo a presenciar nuevas pruebas en eventos retransmitidos en directo, desafiando a los escépticos y añadiendo capas al misterio. En relación con esto, agradecemos a Gaia que comparta con nosotros su documental de 1 hora en el que desvela toda la historia de las enigmáticas momias alienígenas con todo lujo de detalles. Si quieres ver más series y documentales de Gaia, haz clic en el enlace de la descripción. Y de momento esperamos que disfrutes del video.
Has a new humanoid species been discovered in the mountains near Nazca, Peru?
We are living in a very exciting moment. This is pure history in the making.
Have scientists working around the world proven that the Nazca mummies are genuine?
The results strongly support that these beings are not closely related to any known organism on Earth.
Is there a concerted effort to discredit and deny the evidence?
The Ministry of Culture, until last Friday, was interested in participating, but for unknown reasons, they've backed down.
If it was really an ET mummy, they should be able to show CAT scans and x-rays of the individual.
They have done x-rays on them. Is that something the Ministry of Culture would be interested in?
Never before seen footage of the location where the bodies were found.
It's clear that this was some hidden place. Maybe there are more subjects.
New high-resolution CAT scans that contain startling revelations.
Inside, he was able to detect the fetus of some creature. It is clear by scientists that it's something different. It is not human.
Unearthing Nazca. In 2016, a rare find was discovered in the Palpa region, south of Peru, very close to the mythical region of Nazca. A huaquero, or tomb raider, found a group of mummified bodies with surprising physical characteristics, hands with 3 fingers, and elongated heads. According to his account, he found them in a secret tomb, of which only he knew the location. The subsequent testing on these bodies revealed extraordinary facts, such as their ancientness and the fact that it was a biological organism. At the same time, the tests opened more questions of what these mummified beings could be. The country's government officials and archaeologists were very adamant about not being involved, yet they let the testing continue privately. What did this huaquero really find that day in 2016? And why have the local authorities not taken part in the research of what could be an unparalleled discovery in Peru? Is this a well-orchestrated fraud by a tomb raider? Or are we facing a blatant attempt to discredit such an astonishing finding? And if so, for what purpose? This is the story of a group of scientists and journalists from different countries looking to gain access to the mummies and discover the truth, no matter what the barriers might be. If you are questioning why a grave robber should be trusted with such a find, we want to bring to your attention that sometimes the most astonishing finds in history can be uncovered in the most unorthodox ways. We are not condoning the idea of robbing graves. We are simply saying that throughout history, there have been discoveries found by such a person that changed the course of history and what we thought we knew about ancient cultures. Such is the case of the most ancient biblical texts on record, the so-called Dead Sea Scrolls written in Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. The scrolls were found by Bedouin shepherds looking for their goats in a cave of the Qumran region. They gathered as much as they could carry and sold some of the scrolls to the highest bidder and used the rest for kindling for a fire. This find not only became a source of income for the shepherds, but it provided a wealth of comparative material for New Testament scholars, including many important parallels between Christianity and Judaism. On the other side of the world, a similar story took place. In Peru, in 1987, authorities became aware of a magnificent find after a disagreement between two grave robbers that led to the discovery of the Lord of Sipan tomb. This discovery was compared to the excavation of King Tut in Egypt, an almost completely intact ancient burial, which is a rare and dazzling discovery. It was quite rare for archaeologists to have access to a tomb which is nearly complete, like the one they found with Lord Sipan. This allowed new discoveries by archaeologists and historians' previous knowledge of the Mochi culture. This story also begins with a tomb raider, or Huaquero, who we will call Mario. When entering a secret tomb, he found something that he had never seen before. Several mummies, with very different characteristics to humans, like very strange heads and hands covered in a white powder. Without specifying the exact site, he said that it was in a desert between Palpa and Nazca, in the department of Ica, an archaeological area in which several remnants have been found. According to those who still conduct this illicit activity, it still hides many more treasures. Because of his expertise, Mario knew that he had found pieces of great value. To be absolutely certain, he contacted Thierry Jamin, director of the Institute Incari, a non-governmental organization located in Cusco, dedicated to the study of the historical Peruvian heritage. The purpose of showing Thierry the pieces he had found was to know if they were authentic or fake.
Habitantes peruanos del campo.
Locals from this region of Peru, from the countryside, sometimes come to us with archaeological samples, ceramics and other artifacts, as well as their accounts about such and such a site they've discovered. In October 2016, we received one of those visits. The group was in possession of several artifacts, little bodies, heads, and hands. They were looking for our professional opinion and support. They wanted our help in disclosing the findings. Our first impression was that they were authentic, given our expertise in analyzing mummified objects. Immediately, we realized the significance of the findings and thought it was a breakthrough. We felt we did not have the right to keep it to ourselves.
The information was uploaded to the internet, so it became public knowledge. Immediately, people from all over the world were interested in the findings, and ready to conduct a deeper investigation of the pieces shown on the internet.
In October, November 2016, I saw some videos through internet in YouTube of this man in Peru presenting little bodies that didn't look human. He presented a huge hand, it didn't look human. He said that they were found in a tomb in the middle of the desert near Nazca. Then I didn't put attention because I thought they were fakes. It's a hoax. I don't like it. I don't feel right when someone wants to be anonymous. But in March 2017, a biologist called me and said, Jaime, look at this. This is very interesting. Have you talked to Thierry Jamin? He's a French archaeologist living in Cusco. And I say, no. And he said, don't you want to interview him? And then I interviewed him in my program in the internet. And I thought this was very serious. I thought this was very important. I thought this man had my credibility, Thierry Jamin. And I said, I have to go to Peru.
Jaime Musan contacted Gaia to see if they wanted to investigate the bodies with him and his team.
Our real mission on taking this lead and following Jaime to see these bodies was just to see what it is. We're just literally there because we're curious of what it might be.
Several crews consisting of camera operators, translators, journalists, and forensic experts headed to Cusco, Peru to see the pieces for themselves. Thierry believed the best thing to do was to alert the authorities as well, so they could join in the discovery. On January 11, 2017, Thierry Jamin sent a letter to Dr. Jorge Nieto Montesinos, director of the Ministry of Culture in Peru, to inform him of the findings and to request his participation in the investigations. However, an official response was never received.
Me puse en contacto con el Ministerio de Cultura peruano.
I got in touch with the Peruvian Ministry of Culture at the beginning of January in order to make them aware of the case. We were worried for the possibility that this archaeological treasure trove would be taken out of the country. We acted promptly to try and make the government intervene before the pieces disappeared. I never received an official response. An archaeologist named Alberto Jacinto, head of the culture department at Nazca, got in touch with me via email to let me know that the minister in Lima had assigned him the case and ordered him to investigate. But I never received a direct answer from the ministry through a letter, as I expected, in reply to our letter.
The null answer from the Peruvian government left those interested with no other alternative but to become the investigators and researchers themselves, to try getting to the bottom of the matter. Little by little, an interdisciplinary group of professionals took shape, with people from 5 countries. It included scientist Konstantin Korotkov from Russia, journalists from Mexico and Peru, as well as the journalistic team from Gaia in the US, biologists and forensic doctors from Mexico, the US, and Peru, as well as archaeologist Thierry Jamin from France. With their combined efforts and individual abilities, they would try to reach an objective explanation to such a discovery. The team knew that despite the excitement and optimism, it would be necessary to compile evidence that could prove the discovery to be real. So they began the trip to Peru with hopes to meet Mario and gain access to the bodies that had caused such high expectations.
We're in contact with all the players involved in the finding. We will start our research in order to establish the authenticity of the pieces.
I've only seen the photographs and the x-rays, and I'm very impressed with it. And I think this could be one of the most important discoveries ever in the history of the human race, actually.
Well, we are ready to start this important trip to Peru to find out if these bodies are really non-human or if they are just an elaborated hoax. The results that we are going to find through forensic scientists, biologists, and investigators are going to be very important.
But things in Peru would not be so simple for the team. Gaining access to the bodies would be much more complicated than they had anticipated initially. The team had to negotiate in length just to gain access to the bodies. The first palpable evidence was given to the team in Cusco at the Institute Incari. Its director, Thierry Jamin, showed several objects that Mario agreed for the group to see. Being face to face with the objects created an atmosphere of excitement and expectation. At the same time, it required them to capture as much data from the pieces as possible without losing objectivity. The first pieces of evidence were two strange, elongated heads.
In this piece, there is a very small mandible. Very small. In the second piece, we can see the atlas or C1, the vertebrae that sits just below the skull. We can see some grooves. There's also what could be considered a mouth, nasal sinuses, a nose, and also orbital cavities, very prominent. Those cavities are crossed by grooves in both pieces. Both pieces are very similar.
But were they real? During the first trip, the team learned that someone who had been associated with Mario showed the Ministry of Culture a three-fingered hand. The ministry labeled it as a fraud. They declared that the hands had been intentionally mutilated by removing two fingers, and that smeared plaster was giving them a mummified appearance. Additionally, the ministry concluded that the transformation was done in a workshop in Nazca. These assertions would certainly complicate the investigation. The ministry would condition the Peruvian scientists to be incredulous and ready to discredit any information related to this finding. Why would the Ministry of Culture look at this piece of evidence and not the other bodies Thierry wrote them about? The team continues to investigate all the findings to see if there was evidence of something organic. In this first visit, Thierry Jamin showed the group a couple of bodies about 60 centimeters in length, which had an organic appearance. Furthermore, one of the bodies had a strange bulge in the belly, much like that of a gestating organism.
In this being, we find joints both in the elbows and lower limbs. Also, there are hip joints. There is a small bulge in the stomach near the hips.
We need radiographs, or better yet, CAT scans, in order to determine what this protrusion is.
The group moved to a clinic to perform X-rays and CAT scans on the bodies and find out if they actually had an internal bone structure. The group also wanted to learn more about the bulge in the belly in one of the bodies. While performing the X-rays and CAT scans, they discovered some interesting structures inside the body.
Esta imagen es importantísima porque nos permite ver, además,
This is a very important image as it allows us to observe the bones, the skull with its bone consistency, but also the metal within its chest. This piece of metal won't allow us to see the bone underneath. This metal piece is embedded in the chest of the object. It blocks the view from the bones behind. However, when we reach the pelvic cavity, or lower stomach, we see three structures with an oval shape. These structures do allow rays to penetrate and show the bone structure behind. You can't see it in radiographs, but upon physical examination of the specimen, we noticed a structure between the legs that could be identified as a birth canal. We can't be sure, but it is consistent with similar structures in species, such as reptiles that develop and lay eggs.
The team was definitely impressed, and so Mario promised more bodies. They continued with the investigation. The team moved to the southern part of the country, to the Nazca region. This place is known worldwide because of the lines and figures carved into the sandy desert-like floor that can only be observed from high altitude. The structures date back some 1,700 years, which coincides with the time the Nazca culture flourished in the region. The lines in the Nazca figures, the geometric shapes, and the diverse animals, such as birds, monkeys, spiders, hummingbirds, and even a whale, are scattered over an area which covers several kilometers. Each figure varies in size. They can measure just a few meters, or hundreds. According to some studies, the figures could have served as an astronomical calendar, because several of them are positioned to indicate equinoxes, or solstices, as well as the movement of planets and the moon. Thanks to the absence of rainfall in the area and the mineral composition of the terrain, the traces remain almost unchanged to this day. Near this area, in the region of Palpa, the team was taken to a secret place where Mario promised to have a big surprise for them. From the beginning, Mario refused to give the exact location of the tomb. However, if an agreement was reached, he would be willing to show them a larger, unique mummy, which they had discussed. He took the group to the top floor of his house, where after more negotiations, he finally agreed to bring the piece.
We have a very important mission here in Peru. I came here together with a group of scientists, professionals, journalists, because we were supposed to see maybe one of the most important discoveries of the 21st century.
Mario placed the box in front of the team. Inside was the mummy, life-sized and in the fetal position. It looked almost human, except for some remarkable differences. The mummy had only 3 fingers, with 4 phalanges in its hands and feet. The head had an elongated shape. It was covered with a white powder. Unlike the Egyptian mummies, this was a desiccated body, apparently by natural methods. It showed no signs of decay and was in excellent condition.
Podemos apreciar
We have before us a body of anthropomorphic structure. It has a head, neck, thoracic cage, pelvis, and upper and lower limbs. Specifically, in the head, we notice a well-articulated jawbone, no auricles, but auditory canals on both sides.
It can change the consciousness of humanity as a whole. And all our concepts about history, about development, those are just concepts. And this opens up absolutely new page of history. No doubts that it is a tremendous discovery.
The piece was named Maria. The team took samples of the body to be tested in different laboratories in Russia, the United States, Canada, and Mexico. The X-rays and topographies that were performed on Maria showed surprising results and confirmed that it was an organic being with a bone structure. Constantine showed some of the scans to the head of image analysis at a medical institute in Russia.
We performed a CAT scan of a mature individual, a mummy referred to as Maria. It is the skeleton of a person with an anomaly. It's 3-fingered. If we consider the traditional notion, the mummification process involves removal of internal organs, so technically this is not a mummy. But if we consider that the body was mummified naturally, meaning the organs were simply not removed, this is a skeleton that is very well preserved, and we were able to clearly see many details in our CAT scans. All the structures and bones in the main body are visible in the analyzed tomography.
If I understand correctly that some organs remained, does this prove that it is a real body?
I would say yes. because on scans of the back of the skull we saw structures that are less dense than bone structures and most likely are hydrated remnants of the brain.
Gaia also found a radiologist at a hospital in Denver, Colorado, to take a look at the scans.
I am very curious to see what these images look like. I think what I can offer looking at the images, looking at bones all day long and having expertise in bone, the bones of any mammalian skeleton, they're incredibly complex, which is a good thing for this because they're going to be extremely hard to reproduce. So I think we'll be able to tell if these are truly authentic bones. Looking at this skeleton, obviously we have a fairly humanoid-looking bone. We've got the eyes that are facing forward. We've got the mandible with, you can see, rows of teeth, both above and below. The shape of the skull is interesting. It's very elongated, an atypical appearance of a human skull like you and I know. Looking at the rest of the skeleton, we have a thoracic spine that's holding the ribs, or your rib cage of the chest. All of that looks very humanoid as well. Femurs, we have the tibia and the fibula. All of that is pretty typical. And then even in the forearm here, you have bones called the radius and the ulna. Now what's interesting here is we see there is a collection of bones here. This is called the carpus of the wrist. That's a typical appearance, but as we move outward, we're seeing really 3 distinct fingers, which is fascinating. The skull, I don't see any suture lines. There's no bones that are separate in the skull. They all appear fused. So this appears to be a solid structure. In the hand, coming from the carpus, not only do we see 3 and only 3 fingers, but you have enlargement of the bones as well. So we're seeing the same thing happening in the feet. The metacarpals and the phalanges. Metacarpals are in the palm of the hand. Phalanges are the fingers. So if we look at where the metacarpals would lie, these are very thick bones. They're much thicker than bones that you would find in my hand or in your hand. Same thing with the phalanges as well, or the finger bones, are very robust.
If the CAT scans and X-rays proved it was organic bone, and the bones didn't seem to be altered, could this be evidence of a new species? The team didn't want to jump to conclusions, so they waited for the samples to give them more evidence. The first test done with the samples was to determine what the white powder was. The white powder that was coating the bodies, said to be plaster, was actually a substance called diatomaceous earth. This diatomaceous earth is a fossilized microscopic algae that formed on the Earth during the Pleistocene era. This powder has desiccant and absorbent qualities, and can also function as a natural fungicide and insecticide, which certainly helped preserve the body and kept it free of external pathogens. Another fact is that there are deposits of this substance very close to the Nazca area, and also this substance naturally occurs in some caves. But what does it mean that the bodies are covered with this powder? Could the bodies have been placed in these caves with diatomaceous earth? Or could the substance have been placed on the body in an unknown ritual? At this point in the investigation, the team was informed of the discovery of 2 more bodies. It was a headless body, about 60 centimeters in length, and the body of a baby, with the same characteristics as Maria. Both were covered with a white powder. According to Mario, these 2 bodies were found in the same tomb where the others were discovered. The baby's body was named Wawita, which means baby in the Quechua dialect. The headless body, in a seated position, was given the name Victoria. The Wawita topography showed the mummy of a child with a formed skeleton in the fetal position. Both hands had 3 fingers each, but there were signs of finger removal. The right hand had 4 visible bones of the metacarpus. The left had 3 bones of the metacarpus, and signs of bone removal. Was this body tampered with by Mario and his team? Or could the body have been modified hundreds of years ago? And if this was the case, what was the reason? The team decided to focus on the other bodies, of which they could not find evidence of bone removal or tampering, because test results were still coming in. By now, the results of the carbon-14 dating study conducted on Maria by the laboratory of the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico were received. The result dated the mummy to be 1,770 years old. This placed it in the period of the Nazca culture flourishing, thus proving that the mummy was not modern. Gaia also did their own testing at a facility in the United States called Beta, and the numbers came out to be the same for Maria, approximately 1,700 years old. The smaller body, Victoria, was dated around 800 AD. But there was still more testing to do on the bodies that would prove or disprove what these bodies might be made of. Samples were taken again from the bodies for DNA testing. The team was hoping to see if the DNA matched any modern human species or any other known biological species on the planet. This result could help decide if there was a serious case to keep investigating. Meanwhile, the null answer given by the Ministry of Culture and the constant attacks by Peruvian anthropologists and archaeologists were discouraging for the team. This adverse climate hindered investigations. Members of the team reached out to archaeologists to come look at the bodies and decide for themselves, but they refused. Instead, many attempts by these parties were made to discredit any information surfacing about the mummies. In tests and research carried out by the team, the participation of ministry scientists still to this day has been non-existent. Journalist Jaime Musan sent a letter to the Peruvian Minister of Culture to request a meeting in which he could talk about the findings and results of the investigations carried out thus far. He hoped that the ministry would join in the research of something that could be a great archaeological discovery and to allow them to revise the evidence firsthand. But the result was not what he expected.
Very disappointed. We expected to be treated by the Minister of Culture here in Peru. But unfortunately, they sent someone from second or third level to tell us that we should send an email requesting for something like this. It's very unfortunate. I think they don't have any interest to cooperate and to do any kind of investigation around this case. It's very unfortunate to find the truth, and for everyone, not just here in Peru, but around the world.
But the team carried on to find some kind of truth. The samples that were taken by Konstantin Korotkov on the last visit were tested in Russia. The first DNA analysis, performed in Russia by the Institute of Analytical Chemistry at the University of St. Petersburg, took just over a month. Dr. Mikhail Asiv oversaw the DNA extraction, and the results showed that it was an organic specimen that once had life, specifically of a female creature, because the DNA included the X chromosome.
When our scientists in St. Petersburg, in one of the top laboratories, was able to make DNA testing of this big body, and this DNA have only X chromosomes, it means that this is a lady, this is a female. Now, of course, they need to make next stage of research. They need to make sequencing of this DNA. It means to define genome and define all genes and compare those genes with existing libraries of genes.
From the first results of the DNA test practiced on Maria, new questions arose. Although it was an organic body more than 1,700 years old, the three-fingered hands and feet still needed to be tested to prove that they were real as well. Besides, more samples needed to be taken off of the other three bodies and from Wawita. It would be necessary to remove tissues from the mummy's feet, hands, and body again to check to see if they indeed belong to the same individual. But convincing Mario to allow taking new samples would not be so easy. At first, the fear that the bodies could be severely damaged made him profoundly refuse any more sample extractions. The team explained the need to take those samples to verify that all parts of the body belong to the same subject. An arduous negotiation was necessary to convince him of the new collection of samples. But he finally agreed, only for the bodies of Maria, Wawita, and Victoria. Josefina and Alberto were off limits. According to Mario, 3 more bodies with similar characteristics to the previous ones were discovered in a nearby cave. These 3 bodies, close to 60 centimeters in length, also had 3-fingered hands and feet with elongated skulls. The 3 bodies were given a nickname, the family. They were covered with the same white powder as the previous ones, diatomaceous earth. But where was this tomb? The team wondered if they were ever going to see this cave, and how many bodies actually existed in what Mario referred to as a large tomb. They, just like the archaeological experts in Peru, wanted to know that an actual tomb or location of the bodies existed. To summarize, with these additional 3 mummies, 6 bodies thus far had been presented that were approximately 60 centimeters in length. 3 of them had been given names. They were Alberto, Josefina, and Victoria. 2 of the mummies had human characteristics, a life-size, known as Maria, and the baby, they called Wawita. Also discovered were 3 3-fingered hands and 2 heads. It is not certain that these are all the pieces that exist, because of Mario's inconsistent accounts. He sometimes did mention that there could be many more. Even Thierry Jamin suspects that some of those pieces may be moved out of Peru.
Mario se puso en contacto conmigo and
Mario got in touch with me in January, and we met in Bolivia in the city of La Paz, with a lot of secrecy because he is a very mistrusting person. We sat down and I tried to convince him not to sell any of the artifacts, telling him that his name would go down in history as the man who made the great discovery, but he would not listen. He only cares about the money. Mario is a huaquero, a professional tomb robber for over 25 years, with high-level contacts, from Brazilian politicians to Peruvian heads of state and renowned archaeologists here in Peru.
Could Mario have been selling to the highest bidder? And if this were true, how was this jeopardizing the case? Could the stalling by the Peruvian government, or negative press provided by people convinced it was a hoax, actually have aided in a more sinister plan to cover it up? The team could only suspect these things without proof. In the meantime, they need to continue gathering data. Samples taken from the different areas of Maria's body, especially the feet, hands, pelvis, and under the arm, were analyzed by DNA tests at the University of St. Petersburg. The tests connected the tissues from all these areas to the same body. It disproved the theory of some Peruvian archaeologists that it was a body built with parts of different creatures. The test also revealed something very interesting.
Please tell me, what progress have you made to analyze our specimens?
We have carried out an elemental analysis of these specimens, and generally speaking, the data that we received allows us to make a conclusion that it is an ordinary set of elements, except for cadmium. We have found cadmium chloride on the surface of these specimens. Actually, the specimens were obviously covered with cadmium chloride and diatomaceous earth.
As far as I understand, cadmium chloride is not found at all in nature.
It needs to be acidized, extracted, then transformed into a soluble form into cadmium chloride. It also needs to be purified for sure. It is a complicated procedure.
So it is unobtainable or impossible for the primitive civilizations. Is that correct?
If they do not have concentrated acids and simple chemical reactors, then it is really impossible.
It is clear that all those subjects, they were processed with cadmium chloride. And those elements may be created only by highly developed civilization. It's not simple people living in Nazca area, different tribes, who was able to make this chemical process. Our European civilization came to this process only in the mid of 19th century. Now we use a lot of cadmium chloride in our civilization to preserve different subjects, because this is the best preserver that kills all bacteria, all contaminations and viruses. So we use it in our modern life a lot, but it doesn't exist in nature.
Unusual discovery. But what did it mean? As the team waited for more specific DNA results, Mario agreed to take some people to the cave. He invited Peruvian journalists Joyce Mantilla, Thierry Jamin, his team, and Dr. Konstantin Korotkov to show them the site. They departed from Palpa and entered an area of arid mountains where it would be easy to get lost. After a few kilometers, they descended from Mario's old car and began a hike along the rocky path. Later, the trail disappeared, and the group had to climb, making their way between the rocks. An hour later, they arrived at the cave. The entrance was covered by stones, which helped it go unnoticed, except to Mario's expert eyes. After visiting the cave, it was clear that this cave was covered in diatomaceous earth. But could this be the actual cave?
In those mountains, there are no grass, no vegetation, nothing alive. So they're totally dead. And it's a big contrast. You look there, you see beautiful place with a lot of trees and everything. You look here, you see only rocks. When we came to the cave itself, it's not so big, but it's not like a cave which been used by ancient people, where they can make fire, we sit together. No, it's just a little cave. All this cave was covered with this dust. It was not only on the floor, but all around. So it was, again, clear that it's natural material. First of all, I don't believe in anything Mario tells. It is clear for me, that the cave we were taken, it's not the only cave.
El contexto en el que se dio todo eso fue un contexto de mucha controversia.
There was a lot of controversy surrounding the location of the site, as different groups of tomb raiders pointed to different locations, none of which corresponded to what had been described. Mario finally decided to contact us and show us the place. Getting there was very difficult. Only someone with local knowledge would be able to find it, because to the untrained eye, there was no way of telling the entrance to the cave, as it was covered with small stones. When we got to the place, we did not believe it. Because we had been told it was a citadel with walls and a gate, many chambers with inscriptions, and there was none of that. We were disappointed because it was not the story we had heard. I was upset, confused, and disappointed, all at once, because Mario is the sole source of the story. In journalist work, you cross-reference several accounts to find the truth on a story. But when you have only one source, only one person to tell you that story, you either believe them or you don't. If the bodies are real, the story can be real. But in this case, his original story did not match. Having said that, several features did match. The smell on the cave was similar to that of the mummies. The space distribution also matched. We saw the exact location where Wawida, Maria, and the family of 2-foot beings were found. Those calculations make it likely that this was the place where the mummies were found. But there were definitely no ruins or ancient citadel.
This fact was a disappointment for the team. The tomb, so frequently referred to, did not exist as such. However, the cave shown coincided in many ways with some of the characteristics found in the bodies. Therefore, Despite the disappointment, it was plausible that the mummies could have come from that place. More genetic results came trickling in. There were DNA results from Mexico and from Russia.
The sequencing process itself is run on a device called the genome sequencer. In our case, we used two sequencers, one for the primary analysis, MiSeq sequencer, and HiSeq sequencer for a comprehensive analysis of the genomic DNA. A great amount of data is generated after sequencing. This data is generated in the machine. After this data has been generated, it is transferred to a computer, and then our colleague Alexei, a bioinformatician, used them to analyze the data. He found out that there are actually ancient samples, and we can yield the ancient DNA, and we have it. The fact that this ancient DNA has a lot of variations that are alternative to the standard genome is quite interesting. In other words, it tells us that we actually have unique and new data.
The latest results from the DNA studies of the bodies have shown surprising results for Maria and Wawita. This means that according to the report from the DNA samples taken from several areas of the bodies, they were able to get approximately 23.8% from Maria and 25.6% DNA from Wawita of human-like DNA. But none of that matched to modern human DNA.
The sample was analyzed to determine whether or not it contained human DNA, which was one of the hypotheses that could explain these strange bodies. That possibility was explored, and the results were around a 10% match in strict conditions, and even relaxing some of the parameters, we could not get a 100% match with human DNA. The analysis included a vast array of species. One of the software programs we use, in particular, performs comparisons with more than 1 million species, which allows us to approximate as much as possible the sample with the DNA of all currently known species. Some species were a higher match, some plants and bovine DNA, but still in very small portions. I have to say that this sample contains DNA that we currently don't know. It could be from an organism that has not been studied. Perhaps there was some microbiological contamination of the samples, but it could also be original DNA from these bodies. That means that these bodies could belong to a previously unknown species.
The genetic results were also showed to William Brown, a biophysicist from Southern California, and his take on the tests were very interesting.
Of the DNA that was isolated, only 25% of the total matched any known human gene. So that means that 75% of this DNA is not matching any known human reference sequence. And you know, this is pretty rigorous because there's like the 1,000 Human Genome Project, where they have done whole genome sequencing of over 2,000 individuals from every continent on Earth and compiled kind of like a average human reference genome. And so you take these sequences isolated from the sample with this being, and you go and you compare them to that human reference genome data, and only 25% match up. 75% don't.
DNA sequencing can take months or even years, depending on the questions asked. Given the small samples the team had, they wanted to ask the first question: could this DNA match any known modern DNA? And that answer came out as no, from the lab the Mexico team used in Canada, and also the team in Russia. Is it normal for all labs in different countries to come up with the same results?
I'm Dr. Doug Taylor. I'm a professor of biotechnology here at Harrisburg University. My background is I have a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology. When you think about any parameters associated with or methodologies for sequencing DNA, How is it different from one place versus another?
I thought that there just was a set DNA sequencing process across every country, across every lab, but you're saying that's not the case. If you could explain DNA sequencing differences in other countries.
Start with DNA sequencing, it's evolving. What is the question you're trying to ask? That'll determine how do I go about isolating this? And it can vary from lab to lab or country to country. But also comes the next question is what am I trying to answer? And what specific population of DNA am I trying to look at, or where I think is going to give me that answer? And that may determine, okay, well, I need to put in this intermediate step, which is going to enhance that population of DNA, which is going to make it more likely that I'm going to get an answer. So this is an incredibly interesting find, and it really needs to be looked into. And I think, and it's kind of an exciting time that different groups can apply different expertise. We're no longer these little individual groups anymore. You have a global community. We can bring everyone together on the global scale to provide different expertise in order to answer some of these questions. Is it human? Yes or no? But beyond that, what does it mean for humans as a race?
The DNA samples were also taken from Victoria, one of the smaller bodies, and the results were also very surprising.
Of course, it was very important for us to make DNA tests of little creatures, and we didn't want to disturb big little ones, because they are so tiny that, of course, it should be done only in very special conditions, in very sterile room, in special atmosphere. So we didn't want to make it in just in simple room. That's why we had only access to headless one, where it was possible to get samples from the neck. First conclusions, both in Russia and in Mexico, was it is not human. So of all known to us DNA of organic life, I mean humans, animals, plants, bacteria, microbes, there are no correlation with DNA of Victoria. No match at all. So that's why it is clear conclusion by scientists that it's something different.
For the experts involved in this case, it's clear that this is something amazing and never before seen. But there was still more data to gather. Data that would compare their DNA sample to other human species on the planet, such as Neanderthal or Denisovan. To take more samples of the bodies and to compare the DNA of these creatures to other human species, the Gaia team traveled back to Peru. This time, they were accompanied by scientist William Brown, who had a special interest in getting the samples into a specific lab in the United States.
And what are you possibly going to be doing with the samples on your end?
So, if we are successful in retrieving samples, I have labs that I work with where we can do a very thorough cleaning of the sample to reduce contamination, and we can do the kind of DNA sequencing and analysis that will definitively show the nature or origins of the bodies.
Another scientist and PhD from Russia, Dmitry Galiki, accompanied Konstantin Korotkov to gather data for their ongoing study they had going in their labs.
How do you feel that your expertise is going to forward this case?
This is such an interesting moment in terms of the anatomical analysis of the CT scans. And, of course, what I would like to see are the tissues, the composition of the tissues.
Do you feel that the small bodies are more interesting than Maria and Wawita?
The little ones are very interesting. First of all, there's more of them. There's Josefina, Alberto, and the rest. And their skulls have variants that can be analyzed. Their anatomy is absolutely amazing.
On the trip, Gaia journalist Melissa Tittle managed to get Carla Vargas from the Physical Anthropology Cabinet of the Ministry of Culture of Cusco to talk to her about the strange bodies found in Nazca. Melissa wanted to find out why they were reluctant to join the investigation of this finding, and what their impressions of it were.
What do you think of the Nazca mummy that came out that's, like, people are saying is a hoax?
Well, apparently, based on the information that we've seen on the internet, in the news and so on, it looks like a mummy that has been altered to give the impression that it is not of earthly origin, that it would be an extraterrestrial mummy. What we have been able to see based on the photographs is that the hands of the mummy, it is a real mummy, but it has been altered with those purposes. Some phalanges have been removed, as well as some other bone parts, and other parts have been added to it.
So it's a real mummy, you know, because it's like positioned that way. But you're saying that the phalanges, the fingers and the toes, those have been altered.
They have been altered, yes. If it was really an ET mummy, they should be able to show CAT scans and X-rays of the individual. But they only showed a photograph. There are no further studies that would give credence to their claim. It would be nice to be able to see an X-ray from the individual, to be able to determine if it suffered from a certain pathology or disease, or if it had a condition that made it different.
They have done X-rays on them. Would you be interested in like seeing the body or the X-rays or any of that kind of stuff? Is that something the Ministry of Culture would be interested in?
In principle, the Ministry of Culture, as the official body in charge of protecting our cultural heritage, the first question would be, where did these mummies come from? Why should we give a voice to someone that is destroying our heritage? Someone who is carrying out clandestine excavations. Then, if the individual is able to support his or her research or work, I think the ministry would be willing to study it. But I don't think that will happen.
After the interview with the official of the Ministry of Culture of Cuzco, the team went to the Inkari Institute to grab more samples, where Thierry Jamin informed them that the bodies have disappeared, and he doesn't know where they are.
So everyone knew we were coming, but then they just took the bodies, and now we're just sitting here.
Well, we don't know that they've taken no bodies.
But he's put them in a place.
A month ago.
A month ago.
¿De qué? Pregunta, lo del transporte de los cuerpos de aquí a ese otro lugar, eso fue hace un mes, ¿no?
Ah, menos.
Un poco, a little less than a month.
Menos.
But yeah, that's been
Hace 3-4 veces que debemos cambiar de sitio para la seguridad del material.
They've changed places. They've changed the mummies from place more than 3 times to guarantee the security of the mummies.
Porque también tenemos amenazas de Mario.
Without more DNA tests, they could not ask more questions. For everyone involved in this case, they felt that they had interesting information. But at every turn, there was a block in completing the investigation, whether it was from the government, Mario, or several members of the team. But then, something interesting happened. On August 18th, 2018, the team, including Konstantin and Dmitry, were able to get access to the bodies to do one final tomography that was of the highest quality. These CT tomographies used a special program that allowed a more detailed examination of each layer of the bodies in a precise way that would be able to isolate certain areas for better examination.
After we received these high-resolution images, Professor Gailsky was able to make very detailed analysis of both Maria, big one, and very important, Josefina, little creature. If we talk about Maria, she's human-like. First of all, details of her skull, anatomy of the skull. Second, of course, fingers and toes. So, if we go step by step, then of course, first the skull. On the skull, we see that she has no ears. And construction of her ear bones different from us. This is the first main conclusion. Then construction of skull itself, it's a little bit different. Of course, it is elongated skull, maybe not as elongated as we can see in Paracas, but still it is elongated. It is more elongated compared with our rounded skull. Second, different construction of bones of nose. But all other topics of the skull are very similar. We don't have a lower part of the body. So neither organs of reproduction, nor liver, nor kidneys. It's strange, but this came to some conclusions that maybe she was attacked by some animal. And Professor Galitsky was able to find tracks of claws, fangs on her body. And all this lower part of the body is just as taken away. And then we see some parts of particle that may be related to blood. The most interesting for all of us was analysis of small bodies. And we had CT scans of 2 bodies. And now we know that those are male and female. And we had a high resolution analysis of one of them. Their anatomy construction is totally different from ourselves. No human beings, no animals have type of bones as they have. All living creatures have joints. For little creatures, it's not so. It's some very strange construction, like some balls of tissues inside. This allowed them to have some movements, but not like ourselves. So they were unable to make it like this, but only like this. And same as like this. So it's clear that their movement was quite limited. Then construction of their ribs is again totally different from any living creatures. Because for all living creatures we have this central ball. Their ribs are rounded and they have no this internal part. Absolutely different construction of skull. And of course fingers and toes. They don't have mouths as we do. So it's clear that they were unable to eat hard food. Then totally different construction of ears. They had ears, but no like ears like we do, just holes. And different type of bones inside the ear. There are some bones, it is clearly seen, but different. Then they had some holes on their skull that no living creatures have. And of course, it's absolutely unclear why do they have this type of holes. So what was the reason for nature to have this hole? And of course, detailed analysis in tomography allowed to see that it's not construction, that it's one subject. Because when they make analysis on tomography, they can make it slide by slide and see tiny details on high resolution. So it's clear that it's not composed of different parts, it's one and the same subject. From the very beginning, from the first X-ray, we've seen some rounded subjects in the belly of Josephina. But when we had this detailed CT scan, Professor Galitsky was able to make like a slides on the image of those eggs. And he demonstrated that those are real eggs because they have some cover, like any egg. They have some inside content. And inside, he was able to detect the fetus of some creature. So from one side, it is Josephina fetus. From other side, it is fetus of some living creature.
With all this evidence and detail, could there be something in this that suggests, at the very least, a new species on this planet? Finally, on the morning of November 19th, 2018, Cusco Congressman Armando Villanueva Mercado presided over a hearing about the mummies. Scientists whom had participated in the study of the Peruvian mummies from different countries were invited. Every scientist had 15 minutes to present their data. Several groups presented tomography analysis, describing their anatomical structure. 3 groups presented results of DNA studies of different samples. All of these groups worked independently. With respect to the tomography analysis, the results were presented by Mexican Navy pathologist Dr. Jose Jesus Salsa Benitez and biologist Jose de los Rios Lopez, also from Mexico, and from Peru, radiologist Dr. Raimundo Salas Alfaro and surgeon Dr. Edson Salazar Vivanco. Dr. Galicki presented the results of Russian studies, focusing on the analysis of the characteristics of the body structure not noted by other researchers. In general, all came to the conclusion that the anatomical structure of all mummies is different from humans. Mummies are so complex that any possibility of counterfeiting is eliminated. Biologist Ricardo Rengel of the Mexican company Abraxas Biosystems presented the results of the DNA analysis of the small mummy, Victoria. Sen4Gen Labs from Canada performed a sample processing and sequencing. The fact that it was possible to extract DNA clearly indicated that the sample was from biological tissue. The same conclusion was made in the Russian laboratory of V.S. Baranov. The Canadian laboratory had a greater amount of material, so that they were able to do better sequencing. The computerized analysis of the data showed that this DNA does not coincide with any human being or living organisms. Comparisons were facilitated with microorganisms, bacteria, and animals, such as primates, crocodiles, and turtles. The conclusion was that the specimens were an unknown species of living beings. Therefore, the data from genetic studies, the tomography analysis, and the elementary composition of bodies clearly demonstrated that the mummies were genuine and required more serious research. All the groups worked independently, using their own resources and finances. The main objective of these presentations was to attract the attention of the Peruvian scientific community and to transfer the investigation to the official level. After the scientific presentations, a Peruvian archaeologist was given the floor. He stated that all the data presented was absolutely unacceptable. No one knows where these mummies were found and how they were extracted. No archaeologist was involved. There was no official authorization. And it is unclear on what basis all the studies presented were made. Who authorized it? And where were the samples obtained? He didn't even want to consider the results, or that his own organization wanted nothing to do with the find from the beginning. Other official representatives of Peruvian science were not so blatantly negative. The Peruvian archaeologists' speeches were more neutral, but none of them supported the continuation of the investigation at any level.
The Ministry of Culture, until last Friday, was interested in participating. I went there personally to talk to the Ministry of Culture myself, but for unknown reasons, they've backed down from participating.
After all the findings were presented, the Peruvian government went dark. There was no verdict by the government. Was the evidence too convincing? Was there not enough? But then, something unexpected happened. Despite all the backlash from the anthropologists and archaeologists, a university took interest in the bodies. About 190 miles south of Lima, in the Nazca region, sits the Universidad San Luis Gonzaga in the town of Ica. This university is well known for scientific and technological studies that will help forward the world in changing times, specifically in the country of Peru. Is it possible that from the research gathered thus far, that the university saw potential to dive deeper? The research facility has all the bodies but Josefina, which is being held back by Mario. Mario believes it has great value and refuses to give it to the university. And so, the investigation continues, but in their hands. It seems that the evidence offered by scientists around the world and the persistence of the crew sparked an interest with some of the academic communities in Peru that could not be denied. Perhaps it is the discovery of a new species, a parting of waters in the knowledge of what we have of the human race. Or maybe, is it something completely different? The only people that have tried to find answers are a group of people committed first and foremost to finding what might be the truth. The journey started with a quest to give the truth to the authorities, and it ended with the bodies being transferred into a safe and reliable research facility for a deeper investigation. As the university unravels the truth using high-tech equipment and more DNA studies, the world waits for an official answer. What did Mario really find in the mountains of Nazca? And how has this find sparked a debate that still refuses to be buried?
Una vez más, extendemos nuestro sincero agradecimiento a Gaia por compartir amablemente este episodio esclarecedor con nosotros. La dedicación de Gaia a crear contenido que inspire, informe y empodere resuena perfectamente con nuestra misión. Si estás ansioso por sumergirte más profundamente en los reinos de la sabiduría y la exploración, asegúrate de hacer clic en el enlace en la descripción para suscribirte a Gaia y desbloquear un tesoro de contenido revelador que incluye muchos más episodios como este. Al unirte a la comunidad Gaia con el enlace en la descripción, también estarás apoyando nuestro propio canal, un gesto por el que te agradecemos de todo corazón.